Hello and welcome to this video. I'm going to be talking about a overgrown, overstocked woodland or a degraded woodland in central Missouri. These are really common across the entire state and sure outside of the state as well. And these are a relic of course, the historic ecosystem conditions before settlement, and then also a lot of livestock have been on this site. Usually when we find the cedar, it's a clue that there was livestock or row cropping. These soils are too thin for row cropping, so we can be sure that it was livestock on this one. I'll just play this video and talk in the background here. In this video, I was primarily interested in showing the client these bigger cedar trees that are inside these woodlands, and talking about how to manage them so that they can be healthy and continue to grow, and in fact grow a little faster maybe. This tree was about 22 inches in diameter, and there's others scattered around in this size class, and then of course there are a lot of other smaller cedar trees. This is a really nice post, or you could even get some lumber out of that log, but I'm going to explain in a minute. I recommended to this client that he save that tree and continue to grow it. And here I'm talking about how he can take care of it. It's got about 30% of its total height, or maybe a little more, with live canopy on it. The lower canopy is all dead branches, and then the upper canopy is where all the living branches are. And there's not a lot of competition. It's clearly dominating. But then we've got this blue ash here that's growing over and touching it. And so that's a direct competitor, and we can take that one out. And there's a couple cedar right next to it that can be taken out, smaller cedar. And then there's some more blue ash kind of in the background. That one is not directly competing with the cedar, so for this tree's sake, that one's not a big deal. But then this one here, that one is kind of competing with the cedar, and so that can be taken out. As is typical on a lot of these sites, this is an old growth Chinkapin woodland, and historically it had frequent fire that came through and kept it very open. So between the Chinkapin, there's one right there, and there's several other in the background scattered around. They're kind of hard to see in this video. There's one there. And then here's a shoemart oak, and they like these sites too, and it looks very similar to a northern red oak. But historically, this site burned, and it was grassy, and there was a lot of wildflowers. It was kind of like a prairie underneath the forest, underneath the old growth Chinkapin trees. There probably wasn't any cedar trees, and there probably wasn't that much blue ash. And I say that because all the blue ash that I found are smaller. So we've got the big scattered oak trees. It's an old growth stand of oaks. And it's old growth because these trees are growing on really thin soil, and they don't have good log quality. Most of them are hollow. So every time they've logged this property over the past 150 years, they skipped these areas because these trees weren't any good. There might have been some good ones out here that they did harvest. I imagine there's probably was for sure. But for the most part, they skipped them over, and so lucky for us, we've got these big old growth trees now that were saved from being harvested. When the settlers arrived in this open prairie, or this prairie was below the woodland, they put their livestock on it and used all the grass and the forbs as forage for their livestock. And that probably went on for 100, 150 years, probably ebbed and flowed. Livestock intensity was probably more heavy at times and probably not as heavy at times. And then the way the economy worked here in mid-Missouri, across most of the state, honestly, is when the railroads came in the 1880s, a lot of outside big investors showed up, and they were looking to make money off the land, and so they would set up these big cattle farms, and then they could just ship the cows or the beef to Kansas City or wherever to the stockyards. And so that was a period of rapid depletion of the ecology in the area. And then after World War II, probably in the 60s or 70s, the economy really changed, and a lot of the farmers started going to town for work, and they took the livestock off these marginal acres because they just couldn't afford, I guess, to spend as much time with their herd, and so they they tended to protect these acres. Now that's not true for every farm. Some farms they're still grazing these acres, but every farm's different. And then after they took the livestock off is when all the cedar came in. We often find cedar growing on old agricultural fields and old pasture. And cedar is regenerating the soil. So the livestock really compacted the soil. They changed the soil biology, and they depleted the soil because they kept eating all the nutrients in the plants and taking them away from the soil. And so, when you put a cow on here and you grow it to 1,000 pounds and then you ship it off, you just shipped off 1,000 pounds of nutrients from the soil. And if that doesn't get added back in, that's a long-term depletion that's happening. And that's what's happened in most of our soils. In Missouri, they're not nearly as productive as they were 150 years ago, simply because of the agriculture impact and taking the nutrients off the site. Okay, so this video I made to help the landowner understand that he's got these big cedar trees and how he can take care of them. And I wrote this plan for the property. And in the plan, I'll just go ahead and tell you what I called for was restoring frequent mild intensity fire. So the first thing you want to do is come in here and burn this. And when you burn it, it's going to burn off a lot of the leaf litter. And that's going to allow a lot of seed to germinate because the seed needs to be in touch with the soil. If the seed lands on top of a pile of leaves and it can't get to the soil, the radical that germinates from the seed, if it can't get to the soil, then that seed is toast. And so when we burn the leaf litter off, we see higher germination rates for a lot of native species, including oak acorns. And the fire is going to take out some of these smaller trees, especially the ones that are sick. And this is overstocked woodland, not a lot of sunlight getting down here. So a lot of these smaller trees are sick. And you can see there's not a lot of smaller trees. And that's because of all the shade. So the fire is going to start to open this up down here, and it's going to start to restore native plants on the ground. And that first fire is a site preparation fire. And we want to do that 2 more times. So we do the first fire, and then we give it a year of rest, and we come back 2 years later and do another fire. Mild intensity. We don't want to do hot intensity fire. And then we give it a year rest, and then we come back and do another fire on it would be the 6th year. So 3 fires in 6 years. And we need to put those fires close to each other. If we space them out too far, then we kind of start over because each fire builds on the last fire. And so we need to keep the momentum going. The first fire might take out some of these smaller trees. The second fire might take out some more, but the second fire might also start taking out some of the sick trees that are just a little bigger. And while that's happening, it's putting more sunlight on the ground. And then the third fire is going to do it a little more, open it up just a little more on the bottom. And these mild intensity fires generally don't hurt the big trees at all. Now, by the time you get to the third fire, some of these big trees that are really sick, they may start to drop out as well. After the third fire, you've basically prepared the ground. So now you can do a thinning and start to reduce the number of trees up here, which is then going to put more sunlight on the ground. If we put more sunlight on the ground right now, we're going to get a lot of these shade tolerant, fire intolerant species that aren't necessarily desirable, and some of them aren't native. And I can tell you a lot of these shrubs are coralberry, which the cows don't eat. And so most woodlands that have had livestock on them are loaded with coralberry and some other species like multiflora rose, gooseberry, and we don't necessarily want those species to take off. It's okay if we got a few of them, but we don't want them to dominate. And so the fire will control those, because if we do the thinning before we do the burning, then we're going to get a lot of buckbrush and multiflora rose and whatever else is down there. But if we do the fire first, we can shift that buckbrush and that multiflora rose and all those species to more desirable native species and hopefully more biodiversity. After each fire, you've got the bare soil. You can go ahead and throw some seed out there on the ground and increase the biodiversity by adding new species. And when I say new, well, I mean species that aren't found there now. It's a native species, but it's been extirpated. It's gone. It's no longer found because the system's been degraded for so long. We can add those back in with seed. After each burn is the time to do that. After we burn it 3 times, then we can start to do some thinning. On this property, on this stand, I recommended that we thin out a lot of the smaller cedar trees. These are good posts, and he's got like 200 acres of this on this property. So he's got a lot of cedar posts that he can fill a shipping container and put it on the freeway and truck it anywhere. And there's a lot of places where cedar is not abundant that they want the cedar. Places like in Texas or northern Ohio are 2 places I can think of where I know folks have shipped cedar to. And you can also ship them overseas. I knew a guy who filled containers in Missouri and shipped them to China. He had contacts there, so he could do that. You can also sell them to your neighbor. When you've got this much cedar, it's actually a pretty good. I mean, you're going to make a little bit of money on it. People think that you can't make money on cedar in Missouri, but when you've got this much, you can. Now, I can't remember if I talked about it or not, but I recommended that he save these big cedars because they're going to grow. They're really healthy and they're going to grow a lot over the next 2 decades. They're dominating. If we go back and look at this one, that's a dominant tree. It's got full sunlight all the way around the canopy. And so if we can take out a few of these around it, it's going to increase in growth. It's going to improve in health. And that tree is going to grow and put on a lot of value. Whereas these smaller cedar trees, they're not going to be putting on that much value. They're not that valuable right now. And they're not that big, and so it's going to take them a long time to get value. Whereas these big trees are going to be putting on a lot of value every year. So it's a little backwards from how people normally think about a timber sale. I think a lot of people think that, well, yeah, you take the biggest trees in the timber sale. But these trees can grow a lot bigger. They're still young, relatively. And so taking them now, you're losing a lot of value in that tree at the sawmill. but you're also losing a lot of ecological value. So I recommended that in the thinning, he take out a lot of these smaller cedar trees, keep the bigger ones, and also take out some of the blue ash just because there's so many of them in the stand, and then retain all the old growth chinkapin and shoemart oak or any other oak that are found in here. And then continue burning on a regular basis. After you've done the thinning, you don't necessarily need to burn every 2 years. That every 2 year burning is just a restoration part to restore fire back to the site, to restore the memory, to restore the dynamics, and to help everything kind of fall into line, fall into place. But after we've done the thinning, we don't need to be burning as much, maybe. It all depends. Every site is different, and everybody has a little different goals. And this client has 200 acres, so he could play around and he could burn some of it every other year forever. And that some of it would be a little different. And then he could burn some of it every 5 years or every 3 years or every 8 years. And some of it he can stop burning for like 20 years. And he can create all this different diversity. And that's one of the reasons I like mild intensity fires, is because they allow diversity to happen. Hot intensity fires generally make everything look the same. If you go to some of the public lands down in the Ozarks where they burn hot fires frequently, and they've been doing it for a while, you'll notice that there's not very much diversity. Those hot fires kill everything except the species that can survive extremes. That goes for tree species, shrub species, grass species, wildflower species, and the big one is the soil biology. There's a lot of bacteria and fungus in the soil that are pre-digesting nutrients to make them available for the trees. So there's a lot of minerals and nutrients: calcium, magnesium, nitrogen, copper, iron, all these different uh, nutrients in the soil, but the plants can't digest them because they're in a molecule form that the plant is unable to digest. So all the bacteria and fungi in the soil can. They go and find that nickel and cobalt and nitrogen and calcium, and they digest it and change the molecule so that then the tree can digest the molecule. So whenever we do hot fires, we're basically eliminating a lot of the soil biology, except for the ones that can survive the extremes. And you can see the effects in the trees. It's noticeable. And I'll just say that herbicides do a very similar thing, but it's not as well understood. But there's plenty of studies out there that show that herbicides really disrupt the soil biology. And I used to use a lot of herbicide. It's kind of common, routine, standard practice in the forestry management industry. And I could notice when I would come back to sites when we would put a lot of herbicide down, maybe it had a lot of maple or something that we used a lot of, a lot of trees means that there's a lot of herbicide that's going down every acre. And I could tell, I could come back 1 year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, and be like, this is off. Like, it's not as productive and as vibrant as we expected it to be. And it was because we used a lot of herbicide, of course. It's obvious. So don't like the hot fires. I like the mild intensity fires. And then one last thing I want to say about this site is there are some glades. We can see an opening right here on just a little downslope, and then there's glades upslope. And the soil is a little deeper here. What makes it a glade is there's almost no soil. So there's not enough soil there to support trees, and so it's nice and open. And then as we get away from the glade, the soil gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and we start to see more trees. And because there's not been any fire, it's kind of a sharp contrast, and these glades have really filled in. So I took some video while I was out there of some of these glades, and I'll make another video talking about glade restoration. But really, it's a complex. When we burn, we're going to be burning both. When we do the thinning, we're going to be thinning both. So we've got multiple different kinds of ecosystems out here that we're managing together. But when we're out here with a chainsaw, we need to be aware, and we need to change our behavior depending on how close we are to the glade. Ideally, we want to feather it out to where there's not just this sudden line where we've got trees and then all of a sudden no trees. And then with the fire, this will be more open, and these glades will actually get bigger. I'll just show you here if I can. There's another glade right there. You can see it. So there's another glade there where the soils are really thin, and they can be found on elevation lines generally. So the bedrock is like a bench that comes out, and right here is the edge of the bench. It drops off right over here somewhere. And so the soils are really thin right here on the edge of the bench. And you can see it's just a little opening. Once we start doing restoration work, this area here will start to open up and look more like a glade. And these glades will expand. And I'll save that talk for another video, but we've got a good view of how they're kind of related and interconnected. And so I wanted to show you that here. And then up here, you can't really see it, but you can see how it opens up in the tree canopy. There's another little glade up here. All right, I think that's all I got. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you got any comments or questions, feel free to drop them below, and feel free to hit that subscribe button and share with others. Thanks for watching.